Hello and welcome to this game review. So this was quite a confusing game, at least to me. There were a lot of questions here. So firstly about time control, time trouble. So of course getting in time trouble is very bad. So firstly we have to understand that time trouble is trouble. Let's not forget. We must find a way to not get into time trouble, because if we're having a few seconds on the clock, a few minutes, in classical chess it's not a lot, and inevitably we will blunder. And many examples show this, especially this one, for example. All the moves don't matter if at the end we blunder some kind of one or two move tactic. Up until then, even if we played very well, it doesn't matter, because if you lose in one move, then all of our work will be for nothing. And when we are so low on time, it's inevitable. Most of the time we cannot calculate all the tactics, especially when there's still a lot of stuff on the board. But about the game itself, so we have some kind of normal Slav, nothing special happened, and we get to this sort of endgame. And the way I understand this is that white wants to play b4, b5, and then b4, b5 again to create a passed pawn on the c file. But this doesn't really work with the bishop on g2, as it will be staring at the pawn on d5, and black can also recapture with the knight on b8. So here, for example, if knight d7, then the way I understand it, then b5 should be kind of a good idea. Though still, even here, something like this is fine for black as long as he gets counterplay with b6. If he doesn't, then after b4, white does have some kind of good structure. But okay, h6 is fine, all of these moves are quite fine. Though here, for example, knight e4 is a bit of a strange move. In the opening, we have three goals. Castle the king, fight for the center, and develop the pieces. So we have quite good control of the center, we have castle the king, but why are we not developing the pieces? For example, why not play knight b7 or knight a6 to that matter? This simply attacks the pawn. This is quite a big question. If b5, knight b4, yeah, you've analyzed this yourself. White can take on c6 if he wants, but in general we just have a good knight on b4. We can also anchor it in with a5, and it's definitely better than on b8, right? There's also a threat here. So it's unclear why we're not developing pieces and instead moving around the same piece twice, because this move, sure, you're kind of threatening g5, but what is g5? Like, what are you trying to do with g5? Let's develop the pieces first and then come up with some kind of long-term plan. Okay, g4, bishop h7, g5, knight bd7, and yeah, at some point, the way I understand it, we should just play a6. If we do, then white will never have this idea of playing b5. And now we do have some kind of control over the center, because we have the pawn break of f5, while white can't really play f4. So it's not clear what exactly white wants to do here. Usually what white does is somehow bring the knight to a5, but this doesn't seem very possible for the moment. Also, we always have the idea of bishop d8 and taking off this knight, but this is probably what white should be aiming for. But if we play a6, then we will never have to worry about b5 at least. Instead, black plays f5, which is possible, but as you can see, white will have an easy idea of playing b5 at some point, which wasn't really necessary to allow. Here the pawn takes, which is more natural, but it turns out that this is a bit too slow and we should have involved more pieces in the game. Now if white plays the same move b5, we can take, and now take, because this pawn is defended. Then white will not really have any counterplay associated with bishop takes d5. Instead, the pawn takes, and now b5 is a very nice move. And yeah, knight takes d5 is also a threat if we take. So now we have to, well, we don't have to take, but we did. So this is also a question as to why we're getting rid of this tension, because if you're not taking on b5, there was no point in exchanging these knights, because if the opponent ever takes, then this will just improve our structure, right? So why not just play f4? If he takes, I think we're happy with such a change in structure. Okay, knight c3, bc, and f4. So this makes sense, but firstly, I always like to ask the most concrete questions. Is this not a free pawn? Why are we not taking this pawn? Of course, the engine will tell you that white has compensation, but during the game, we have to really justify not taking free stuff. And here, it is quite clear that we are getting a pawn. So here, white has a couple of ideas. Knight takes g5. Well, this is quite extreme, so I'm not sure if this is what you were thinking about. For example, here, white gets 2 or maybe even more pawns for the piece. Well, he's probably trapping a rook as well. And after something like this, the position is quite chaotic. I wouldn't be so sure that white is better. His bishop is, after all, quite dead. And we just need a few moves to consolidate somehow. So I'm not sure this is the reason you didn't play this. And if knight e5, we can just play knight f6. And again, it's not clear why black cannot take this pawn. What I can see is a pawn ahead. And of course, white has some kind of initiative. But all this is quite abstract. A pawn is a pawn. So we should be materialistic in chess in general. If we don't see a reason to not take a pawn, we should take it. Okay, f4, knight d2, king g7. Bit of a random move. The position is very sharp. This is what we must understand. The king being on g7 does not really change anything about the position. We should probably try to improve our pieces as quickly as possible. For example, knight f6 to e4, or something like a5, but this is a bit of a strange move. It kind of tries to not allow knight b3, because now a4 would be played. But something like knight f6 could be found, because, well, what is the knight doing on d7? Nothing. So let's just improve it. King g7, knight b3. Had white played e3, there would be quite a bit of problems, as now with the e file opening up, this bishop might start hanging, and black might get a weak pawn on the f4 square. Okay, knight b3, bishop d8, again, kind of strange. And again, the same question, why are we not taking a pawn? This time, I guess, white can take here, but we have the very nice move bishop g8, initiating a favorable exchange of bishops, because now, after white takes, we will have this blockading square on d5. White cannot really do anything with his pawns for the moment. We also have the idea of at some point playing a5, a4, if allowed, but mostly knight f6 to d5 is our big idea, starting to target this pawn. And here, black doesn't seem to have any problems. Bishop g8 is maybe a difficult move, but it's findable if we look for candidate moves in this position. There's not much else to look at. The bishop d8, b takes, c4. So white is clearly piling up the pressure here, and we should find a way to get rid of it. And here the obvious threat is c takes d5, winning a pawn and getting 2 connected passed pawns in the meantime. So of course we shouldn't allow this, and there's a lot of ways to stop it. One of them, bishop e4. Of course, if f3, we can just go back or go forward, and now this bishop is completely stuck. Otherwise, if he takes, we can take back. He will get 1 passed pawn, but only that, and we can probably stop it as long as this bishop is blocked. Otherwise, there is also a move like rook b8 attacking the knight. This is maybe less obvious because this is hanging, but still after rook f7, black has some quite good counterplay. The knight will have to move. We might be able to take on c4, getting a passed pawn of our own. But in the end, white played f3, which I don't really understand at all. White took with the pawn, and this kind of justifies it because we're blocking the bishop. But we're giving up a pawn and we're opening up this bishop. So this is one thing I don't understand. Also, why can't white just take like this? Like, are we really sacrificing an exchange here to get this position where we have a bishop for a rook and a pawn? Like, I'm not sure we had to be so extreme here. Like, was it really that big? Because, again, knight f6 is defending. For example, if here, what is the big problem, right? You analyzed rook e6, but this simply attacks a pawn. There's many ways to defend this pawn. We can even probably ignore it, but for example, knight b4 is the most obvious, with the point of putting the pawn on a5. Like, why else did we put the bishop on d8? And this is clearly better for black, as white's pawn majority is not really in motion. His bishop is bad, and we have an easy plan, which you pointed out. But it's not clear why we had to be so drastic about this decision. White made just one threat. There is one threat. There's nothing else. Just defend it, right? Or bishop e4, or even something like bishop g8 is playable, I guess. Why are we sacrificing the exchange? Okay, white took like this, and now we get some kind of chaotic counterplay, bishop f6. And yeah, here I assume you were in time trouble, which is why you did not calculate the only check of the opponent, bishop to e5, after which we are a piece down. But yeah, here we could still play on like this, as you mentioned, some kind of arrows, and we are losing the c6 pawn, we're getting the d4 pawn, and with this structure on the king side, there's no chance of white really winning. Of course, white is kind of pressing, but it's nothing special. But of course, the reason you lost was, I guess, due to time pressure, as this bishop takes d4 doesn't work due to a check, right? And especially when we're in time pressure, we must calculate the checks, firstly. So I'm not sure how this happened. Of course, it's a pawn on the surface, but we must be able to calculate such variations. And yeah, here, bishop to e5, check, forcing us to take. At the end of this, as we saw, the knight is hanging, the bishop is hanging, so this is a double attack, and it's game over. So quite an unfortunate ending, as white was pressuring you from the start, but, well, not from the start, but from the middle. But we could have avoided most of this by kind of keeping the calmness in the position and trying to just answer simple questions. What's the opponent's threat? He's trying to take on d5. Let's defend d5. What exactly is the problem, right? And there's no real variation where white puts up very big pressure. And there were also other variations. But after this, had white just taken with the bishop, keeping it open, I have no clue what you were planning here, because this clearly doesn't really work, as white just has too much material. And there was no reason to go for these drastic measures. But of course, firstly, we cannot get into time pressure. I would suggest writing down your time usage during your games, and then at home figuring out where you're wasting your time, because we do not have to use all of our time during the game. We must keep some time for the moments when we will have to calculate. So time management is also an important issue.